The emergency alert blared through the outpost's communication system 3 days after Elia's recovery from the toxin. Thalira's fingers danced across the holographic interface, her expression growing increasingly troubled as she absorbed the incoming data. "What is it?" Elias asked, setting down the diagnostic tool he'd been repairing, his way of making himself useful during convalescence. "A stellar phenomenon," she explained, expanding a three-dimensional projection of their solar system. "The gas giant is experiencing increased solar radiation, triggering unprecedented atmospheric reactions. The resulting electromagnetic storm will reach this moon within 36 hours." The projection showed angry swirls of energy cascading toward their position, threatening to engulf the small medical outpost. "Central Command is ordering immediate evacuation," she continued, her patterns shifting to the precise angular formation of professional duty. "All non-essential personnel and patients must relocate to the main colonial facility in the neighboring system." Elias felt a strange hollowness form in his chest. "That means me too, I suppose." Thalira didn't respond immediately, instead running a diagnostic scan over his body. Her tendrils extended fully, a sign of deep concentration he'd come to recognize. "Your liver function remains compromised," she finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "The enzyme therapy requires at least another 7 days to fully neutralize the remaining toxin molecules." "But I feel fine," Elias protested, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. His strength had returned, but periodic tremors still coursed through his system, aftershocks of the poisoning. "Transport through the electromagnetic disturbance could reverse your progress." Thalira's fingers hovered over the communication panel. "The protocol in such cases is clear." Her eyes met his, and in that moment, Elias understood what she wasn't saying, that protocols sometimes needed to bend in service of higher principles. "What about you?" he asked quietly. "Will you evacuate with the others?" "As acting medical officer, I am permitted to remain with critical patients who cannot be safely transported." Her patterns shifted subtly, betraying the calculated nature of her assessment. "I would be fulfilling my duty." The next 24 hours passed in a flurry of activity as the outpost's other staff and patients prepared for evacuation. Elias helped where he could, pushing through his lingering weakness to assist with loading medical supplies and securing sensitive equipment. As the last transport prepared for departure, Dr. Corvus, the outpost administrator, pulled Thalira aside for a final consultation. From across the hangar, Elias couldn't hear their conversation, but the rigid set of the administrator's shoulders and Thalira's uncharacteristically static skin patterns suggested disagreement. When she returned to his side, her expression was resolute. "It's done, we stay." Later, as they watched the final transport disappear into the swirling clouds of the moon's thin atmosphere, the reality of their situation settled over them. For at least 5 days, possibly longer if the storm intensified, they would be the only inhabitants of the outpost, isolated from the rest of the galaxy by a wall of electromagnetic interference. "You didn't have to do this," Elias said as they made their way back through the increasingly quiet corridors. "I could have managed on the transport." "Technically, transport would have violated medical protocol," she replied, though her tendrils curled in the way he now recognized as mild amusement. "And I prefer to see my treatments through to completion." That evening, they shared a meal in the now empty communal area. With the mandatory energy conservation measures in place against the coming storm, the room was lit only by emergency lighting and the gentle glow of Thalira's skin patterns. "I've never thanked you properly," Elias said, setting down his utensil. "Not just for saving my life twice now, but for seeing me as more than just another patient." Thalira's patterns shifted to a configuration he hadn't seen before, rippling waves that seemed almost shy. "The Nexthari have a saying, to taste another's essence is to know their truth. When I first diagnosed you, I tasted more than just blood chemistry." "What did you taste?" Elias asked, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper. She hesitated, then reached across the table to touch his hand. "Determination, curiosity, kindness." Her fingers traced a pattern on his palm. "And something else, something rare that resonated with my own essence." The air between them seemed to vibrate with possibility. Outside, the first waves of the electromagnetic storm began to touch the moon's upper atmosphere, creating shimmering curtains of light visible through the viewport. "In my culture," Thalira continued, her voice taking on a melodic quality, "there is a ritual between those who sense such resonance. But it is intimate." Elias turned his hand to intertwine his fingers with hers, marveling at how right it felt despite their anatomical differences. "I'd like to learn more about your culture," he said softly. The lights flickered as the storm's advance guard reached the outpost shields. For a moment, they sat in near darkness, illuminated only by the ethereal glow of Thalira's patterns and the ghostly aurora outside. When emergency power stabilized, Thalira gently led him to the observation dome, a reinforced glass hemisphere at the outpost's highest point. Above them, the storm painted impossible colors across the sky as it collided with the moon's magnetic field. The ritual is called Taslinvar, she explained, her voice almost reverent, the sharing of essence. She produced a small vial from a pocket in her medical tunic. This contains an extract from my cellular matrix. Among my people, it would be offered only to one whose essence complements our own. Understanding dawned on Elias. This wasn't simply a cultural exchange, it was a profound gesture of trust and connection. If you consent, she continued, a single drop on your tongue would allow you to experience my world as I do, briefly but completely. Elias looked at the shimmering liquid, then at Thalira's expectant face framed by the cosmic light show above. In that moment, all his hesitations about their differences seemed insignificant compared to the connection they had formed. I consent, he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. As the storm raged outside, bridging impossible distances between celestial bodies, Elias and Thalira began a different kind of crossing. One measured not in light years, but in the infinite space between two sentient souls reaching toward understanding. The storm lasted 7 days, too longer than predicted. During that time, Elias and Thalira existed in a world of their own making, bounded by the outpost walls yet somehow limitless. The Taslinvar ritual had changed everything. The single drop of Thalira's cellular extract had briefly transformed Elias' senses, allowing him to experience the universe as she did, a symphony of chemical signatures, each with its own story to tell. For those few precious hours, he had understood what it meant to perceive through taste and scent, to read emotions in molecular structures, to sense the very building blocks of reality through chemoreception. The experience had been overwhelming, exhilarating, and profoundly intimate. Though the direct effects had faded, something of it remained, a heightened awareness of Thalira's presence, as if some part of him now resonated at her frequency. As they worked together to maintain the outpost's critical systems through the storm, their movements fell into natural harmony. Where before there had been curiosity and growing affection, now there existed understanding that transcended the need for words. On the morning the storm finally cleared, they stood together in the hydroponics garden, assessing the damage. Despite their best efforts, several specimens hadn't survived the energy fluctuations. Life finds a way to adapt, Thalira observed, gently touching a resilient earth succulent that had not only survived but sprouted new growth, even in environments that seem hostile at first. Elias knew she wasn't just talking about plants. They had spent hours discussing their anatomical and physiological differences, exploring the practical implications of a deeper relationship between human and Nexthari. What might have seemed insurmountable barriers a month ago now appeared as interesting puzzles to solve together. The outpost's communication system chimed, signaling the restoration of contact with the colonial network. Reality was intruding on their secluded world. Central Command reports the evacuation transport will return tomorrow, Thalira said after reviewing the incoming messages. Her patterns shifted to a muted configuration that Elias now recognized as conflicted emotions. He nodded, feeling a similar conflict within himself. His original transport had been declared unsalvageable, the wreckage designated for recycling. The returning evacuation ship would take him to the main colony, where he could arrange passage back to his previous assignment. Back to his old life, a life that now seemed curiously flat and monochromatic compared to what he had experienced here. That evening, they gathered in the observation dome as had become their habit. The gas giant loomed magnificent above them, its surface still churning from the storm's effects. I've been reviewing your medical charts, Thalira said after a comfortable silence. You've made a complete recovery. There's no medical reason for you to remain at the outpost. Is that your professional assessment? Elias asked, watching her patterns swirl with unspoken thoughts. Yes, her voice was carefully neutral. You are cleared for departure. Elias took a deep breath. And what about your personal assessment? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Thalira's patterns shifted to a configuration he'd come to cherish, one she displayed only when they were alone together. My personal assessment is irrelevant to your discharge status, she answered, but her tendrils curled in the way that betrayed her attempt at professional distance. Elias moved closer, reaching out to trace the luminescent patterns on her forearm. It's relevant to me. Thalira's composure wavered. The statistical probability of successful long-term compatibility between our species is uncertain. There are many variables to consider. I'm an engineer, he reminded her with a gentle smile. Solving for unknown variables is what I do. Her tendrils extended slightly, a sign of emotional intensity. You would consider remaining here. This outpost is isolated, far from human population centers. I was thinking about that, Elias said, pulling out a data pad he'd been working on during their quieter moments. The outpost power grid is outdated, and your diagnostic equipment could use significant upgrades. As it happens, that's exactly my specialty. Thalira took the pad, scrolling through his detailed plans for improvements to the facility's infrastructure. These would require at least 6 months to implement properly, she observed, a note of hope entering her voice. At minimum, he agreed. And then there's phase 2, expanding the hydroponics section to include more Earth species with medicinal properties. That could take another year of careful work. Her patterns brightened, literally glowing with increased luminescence. You've given this considerable thought. I have. Elias set the pad aside, taking both her hands in his. I've never been one for making rash decisions, Thalira. I analyze, calculate, and plan, but what I feel for you, it defies analysis. All I know is that when I think about leaving tomorrow, everything in me resists. Thalira's tendrils curled forward, gently framing his face in a gesture he now recognized as profound affection. The Nexthari believe that when essences truly harmonize, separation diminishes both. Then let's not separate, he said simply. I'll speak with Dr. Corvus about a permanent engineering position. The outpost clearly needs the help, and he paused, searching for words adequate to express what had grown between them. I need to see where this leads. Whatever challenges come with bridging our differences, they're worth facing. Thalira's response came not in words, but in the Nexthari way. She leaned forward until her forehead touched his, her tendrils creating a gentle canopy around them both. The gesture conveyed more than any human expression of affection could, a melding of minds and purposes, a chemical promise written in pheromones and subtle electromagnetic fields. As the first stars appeared above the dissipating storm clouds, Elias and Thalira remained in their gentle embrace, two beings from different worlds finding unexpected harmony in each other's presence. When the transport arrived the following day, Elias was not among the departing passengers. Instead, he stood beside Thalira in the control room, transmitting his formal request for reassignment to Outpost Zeta 17. Engineering expertise is always needed on the frontier, he explained to the puzzled transport captain. Later, as they welcomed returning staff and patients, Dr. Corvus observed the subtle ways they moved in coordination, the silent communication that passed between them in glances and gestures. I've seen many forms of healing in my career, the elderly administrator commented as he signed Elias' assignment papers, but few as remarkable as what has happened here. That night, they returned to the hydroponics garden, where the earth succulent continued its improbable growth alongside native Nexthari flora, different species finding common ground in shared resources and complementary strengths. In my culture, Elias said, we have a saying, home is where the heart is. Thalira considered this, her patterns forming the beautiful, complex configuration that he now knew meant love. The Nexthari would say, home is where essences harmonize. She extended her specialized sensory finger, collecting a tiny drop of moisture from a nearby plant. With deliberate tenderness, she touched it to his lips, not as a healer diagnosing a patient, but as a companion sharing her perception of the world. As Elias tasted the complex botanical compounds, experiencing them briefly through her unique sensory framework, he understood that they were building something unprecedented. A bridge between worlds that began with curiosity, was fortified by trust, and now flourished into something that neither human nor Nexthari language had quite the right words to describe. But perhaps, Elias thought as he drew Thalira close under the living lights of the garden, they would have a lifetime to invent those words together.